Can you hear me?
Very good.
There we go.
Thank you very much for the introduction. And also thank you very much for this great inspiring talk up front about innovation. I'm going to talk today about design thinking and how design thinking works. And just to get an idea from the audience, who has ever heard the term design thinking? Please hands up. So I have a couple of hands, so I'm not talking to a fully new audience, but it's obviously also a term which might be really interesting for the rest of you as well. So design thinking is an interesting innovation approach, and I would like to first of all tell you a bit how design thinking works and what it is and where it all comes from, how it can actually foster innovation, and what does this all have to do with communications. That's what I'm going to look into today. And before I'm going to start, I'm going to go a bit further into myself a little bit. So I have a background in design, and I really like to, foster lateral thinking, thinking a bit, beyond the borders, beyond the given, the going, or the kind of given tracks, and to make, people aware of, new developments, and to approach things maybe a little bit from the other side. And I've been actually setting up a lab called Creation Center for the Telekom Innovation Laboratories in Berlin. And our role is to also disrupt innovation there a little bit and really kind of bring the human-centered approach to telecom innovation. And I'm really glad to be here today at the European Communications Summit in Brussels to also give you a bit of perspective of how we do innovation and how we also integrate communication into our activities. And to give you a bit of an idea of how our lab works, I brought a little movie clip with me. And please,
knowledge of users was
have a look.
restricted to spreadsheets. There was a lot of ideas, but there was no space for the ideas. The Creation Center lets you form observations, ask questions, run with thoughts. In fact, we take your mind on a journey. We give you the flexibility to scratch below the surface and deep dive, to observe from the grand scale and inspect from the cellular level, getting inside the minds of your users and see what they see, in order to generate even more great ideas. And that's how the Creation Center journey can save you time and money and increase the quality of your product in a fun way. Thank you.
So there you get a rough idea of what our lab looks like. And lots of people enter our lab and say, oh, I'd love to work there. It looks like a great playground. It looks like a place where we can really think further, think out of the box, and approach things from a different side. And what is it that we do at the Creation Center in Berlin? Well, on one hand, we innovate. We try to really come up with new products and services from a human perspective. But at the same time, we also educate people in the company as well as outside, and also involve communication actively in our innovation processes. And how does this work? In order to have a sustainable impact and really bring new products out there and really, kind of go with this kind of disruptive industry of digital communication and be flexible and react to all these new kind of developments in society, we really have to look at these three areas. And if I talk about innovation, I really think it's important to look at three different aspects. So on one hand, yes, as Telekom, we start out obviously with technology. We have technology history, and we're putting networks out there, and we're providing broadband technology and so forth. So yes, it's important to really start from the technology development and really be in the labs and really kind of, do the actual, hands-on technology developments to really make ideas happen, to really make them feasible. But on the other hand, you also want to earn money. You need to really have a business case behind your technology you're developing to really kind of, bring it out there and have a viable company. But on the other hand, you need the people. And I think you know best that it's important to, look at what people want out there. If you want to reach them and you want to talk to them, you have to also involve them. And this is where design thinking starts. That you really bring the perspective of the people in the whole innovation process to have really, an innovation which you can tangibly experience, and which is really sustainable and really stays, out there a bit longer than just, a bit of technology which might not be relevant to people out there. So I think this is what design thinking is about, to really bring more the people approach in the innovation field. And what does communication have to do with this whole process? So if I look at our lab, we started, with this theory 6 years ago, and he said, well, if we wanted to take this approach into a company like the Telekom, which has 250,000 employees, quite a large, company, how do you get visibility, first of all? So we started doing internal communication by, for example, starting with quite an extensive exhibition with showing our first 100 ideas. So it was 100 days, 100 ideas. We displayed them on these columns, and each idea had a balloon. And if you liked the idea, you could raise the balloon. If you didn't like it, you could pull it down. So again, it was a very interactive way of exhibiting, showing our work, involving the customer, involving the people into what we do. What did we actually do? You can also read in our book, Unternehmen-Idee. So it's also important to also talk to external world out there, not only internally, because that really then feeds back again to what you do and gives you attention inside the company. And instantly, the company, we just published this little magazine. We did a fake Wired for our 5th anniversary to also, critically kind of reflect on what we're doing and what we're going to do in the future. So I think as a lab like ours, it's important to do as well internal as well as external communication to get visibility and to bring this innovation approach in a large corporation like the Deutsche Telekom. And also what we discovered over the last 6 years that it's not only worthy to really come up with new ideas and bring new products and services out there, but in order to really get them on the market, you also need to educate the people internally to understand why it's important to really bring in the customer into the innovation developments. So we actually set up an education program, which we call the Design Thinking Gym. And we're engaging managers to really kind of, work with us for 3 days to learn the techniques, to learn the tools, to also understand why it is so important to have customer approach. So if you don't really plant that, ground the soil or fruitful soil for your human-centered ideas, then it's really, really hard to get them out there. And one other thing which we really like to do is obviously we put the user in the middle of our innovation. So we go out and do lots of user research and deep dive into user worlds. And here in this case, for example, we brought in 3 user worlds into our lab. A senior, a single mom, a teenager. And then we involved managers to really look through the consumer eyes, understand who's living there, what are the needs, what are the hidden desires, and what is it that we can actually do with them or for them. And meanwhile, there's also a whole division called ShareGround, who's really promoting the agile thinking and the human-centered approach in the whole company. So it's not only in the innovation fields that we're really trying to bring this design thinking approach, but also into the HR divisions, the sales divisions, and also the communication divisions. So having met all these 3 aspects, we're not done yet. We still need a couple more things to cover to really have a design thinking approach in our company. So on one hand, yes, it's about culture in the end of the day. It's not only about methods and tools, but it's really about a mindset. And to have this culture, we also, for example, function as a platform. So this table, for example, is a place where people from different backgrounds gather. So it's not only us, the designers, as facilitators, but it's also people from the business background, people from the communications team, people from technology, people from marketing, and so forth. So we really bring different people around this table and function as a platform to foster communication about innovation and really make innovation happen. Obviously, we also have an interdisciplinary team. So we have people from different backgrounds, different cultures, different generations in a very playful manner. And we also have a team culture. Just our Monday lunch every week it helps already to bring up that spirit of doing innovation. And if we look at our space as such, it's not a coincidence that our space looks as colorful and as playful as this. It's really important to activate your right side of the brain to really have a flexible space which you can also really kind of change according to your process steps. And we have a lab full of gadgets and toys, and I think the 3D doodle is also in there, to really kind of get inspired also from gadgets, from innovations in other fields, and from artifacts from society, which also tell a story about people. And obviously we want to involve people in the innovation process, and objects can also help us to do that. And last but not least, we mentioned it already, the Post-it. Yes, innovation labs are kind of read often as Post-it centers, but we very much believe that it's also important to start analog and not always digital. I was once in a brainstorming session where someone asked me to, spill out some words, and they were ready to write them down on an Excel sheet. And I was like, no, this is not how brainstorming works. You really need to, get up, get physically active, write your thoughts on a board so that you can share it with other people. So it's really like a dynamic, starting analog process. And then obviously we have got a couple of tools and methods in our toolbox. So along the whole design thinking process, we pull out lots of different methods which you gather in our lab. And we also created a so-called DIY toolbox, which we give out to people so they can actually start doing design thinking themselves in their divisions, so they don't always have to come to our lab. And what we actually do when we do the design thinking, we follow a certain process. And I don't know if you've heard of a company of IDEO in the Silicon Valley, who actually started bringing the design thinking to the commercial world, let's put it like that. And they claimed these 6 process steps. So what we actually do is that we start out with doing research. We go out into people's worlds, into people's life. We try to observe, we interview, we even do something like cultural probing, where we try to dig deeper into people's lives. And then in the second step, we come back to our lab and we analyze what we found. And it's really about opening up and closing and focusing again before you then start the ideation, the idea generation, where you open up and do lots and lots of ideas. And then you select again and say, okay, so what are the real interesting ones? Which are the ones which will have an impact, which we really want to deep dive maybe in one of the labs? And then we again bring the customer on board. We do the testing. We bring them in our lab and ask them, so how does this actually relate to you? Is this anything answering your needs? And before we implement, we bring the customer several times on board to really get products out there which are relevant to people. And I think it's the same for communication. If you actually want to kind of get relevant content out there, it's important to involve the customer at several points of your development. And that's what we're trying to foster here. And as I said, it's important to open up, to collect all these ideas and to collect all these insights, to collect the content, and then again to make choices and to converge again. And that's actually a current iterative process which we have to go through to really reach the goal. And to sum it up, design thinking for me is a lot more than just running along 6 steps. It's really a mindset, a common language to bring different people around a table together to be able to do innovation from different perspectives. So we really want the only way it really works is really to work interdisciplinary, because I need a voice from someone from technology, as well as someone from design, or someone from marketing, or someone from communication, to really have a successful product out there. And I really, with this kind of approach, can cross the silos in companies. And I don't know how many of you are working in large corporations. In telecom, it's really quite tough to do communication inside a communication company already. So, the silos is an issue to cross. And I think in our lab, we can really bring in a work culture which already can do that. And by that, bring better products out there. So we're really building bridges. We're really thinking multidimensional, user-focused, and obviously with the co-creation, we bring the user on board. And in the end of the day, it really has also quite a strategic impact. And often I also describe it with the analogy of a doctor pulling out the Erste Hilfe box, so the first aid support. And I think it's interesting because what we do as design thinkers, we try to understand what the actual context, what the situation is, doing research, and then we kind of pull out the right tools and methods which are applicable for this problem, for this question. And this is actually what design thinking can do. It's basically a whole kind of box of tools, a whole box of medicine actually you can use to kind of, innovate, to kind of move forward. And going from a step further from the theory, I also brought one project along. And this project is called E-Etiquette, 101 Guidelines for the Digital World. And it very much relates to what we saw yesterday when we were also talking about the information overflow which we can observe out there in the world. There's too many media we consume, too many emails, too many Facebook messages we get on a daily basis, and it's really, kind of overwhelming us. And we also observed this in our research quite a bit when we, go out and see how people are using digital communication tools. And we said, well, it's really time to do something about it. Let's understand how we can help people to deal with this information overflow. Let's do a design thinking process on that actual problem. So basically, how might we support daily interaction and daily communication in society? That was the challenge we started off with. And we ran along, that's this process I just described. So we did a deep dive, user research first, then we did the analysis or synthesis. We tried to really, go with a critical approach to it, compose, a format from our learnings, to then actually bring it out and do more communication with it, to bring the crowd on board and to really kind of involve them in our service design processes. So how does this work? Basically, we've got, user research activities, culture probes activities. So that's, for example, we brought in tools to compare your digital communication tools with your dining communication tools, or dining, like say food or basically eating tools. And we found out really interesting things. So for example, here we've got people saying, well, the most important thing for me is my blog on a daily basis, just like I eat every day. So this was a nice comparison we, for example, took. And one of the quotes I really liked from one of the users said, well, I only upload images which my mother would approve. And I really liked that because it really kind of helped us to give a comparison of how I use information and how I decide what I put online and what not. And I'm seeing time is running up a little bit, so I'm speeding through my project. So what we did in the next step is basically we analyzed all the data which we found through our research. And that brought us actually to publishing a whole book about the e-etiquette and the 101 guidelines for the digital world. And if you want to actually check out a video, you can watch that one here, but let's go to the next slide that shows actually also the website where we published all the guidelines we produced. And basically, what was amazing that people started commenting on these guidelines and really kind of get engaged. And for example, this is one of my favorite guidelines. It's in German, unfortunately. Der Betreff einer E-Mail ist wie die Beschriftung eines Umzugskartons. Was drin ist, sollte auch draufstehen. So basically, what it says is basically the description of an email, what you put in the subject line, is just like a moving box. What's in there should be out there or in there too. So it's basically also bringing analog to digital world, and that is what we try to aim for. And this whole communication activity even brought us to TED. We also won the PR prize, the German PR prize, for our communication activities around the e-etiquette. And in the end, that helped us to get a whole crowd of users, which we then invited back to our lab to ideate on all these findings, to find solutions how to deal with all these issues in the digital world. And in the end, we came up with quite a few interesting ideas. And here are some sketches and prototypes, which you can see. And one guideline, which I really like, and that's, I'm almost done. Basically saying, like, one of my favorite guidelines is, one phone call, for example, can circumvent the whole series of frustrating email exchanges. Do you agree? And this is actually one app or service we came up with to solve this. So imagine, for example, a browser where you actually, have an email program tracking what you have been emailing with and who you've been emailing with for the last, let's say, half hour. And if we've been emailing, for example, 5 times in the last half hour, then there's a little button up there on the right-hand side showing call now. So it's basically providing you, a certain tool to really kind of overcome this, email mountain and maybe to pick up the phone again, just like back then. So these are small services which we really pulled out of these guidelines together with the users. And in addition to that, we also launched an app where we applied gamification to the guidelines. And you can also, feel free to get smart by stitching. That's the whole aesthetic we used. And also we did a whole project on e-etiquette at work, how the work life is also changing due to the digital media. And in the end, we also saw that it's not only changing the digital world, but also the analog world. And those are a couple of stickers we saw out there. Stelle nur die Bilder ins Netz, die deine Mutter freigeben würde. Only upload those images which your mother would approve. So we even found this out there next to the Playboy ad, and I really liked the comparison right here. So what we actually talked about is how design thinking as an approach can actually, bring the user on board and really kind of foster innovation. And I think it's also important to look at how you can, bring the user on board of your communication activities. So if you involve the user already in the innovation process, you're already doing communication, you're already promoting your products. So I think it's a lot more than, putting a PR at the end of a product, but while developing the product already and while doing innovation, once you then get the user already on board in your certain steps, you're already doing communication and you're really doing something valid for the user, you're involving them. And I think that's the way to go for future communication. And that's where I'm going to stop. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Julia Leihener. And I think perhaps one of the most reassuring aspects of the 2 presentations that we've seen so far this morning is the reassurance that analog is definitely not dead, especially in your processing. I mean, you've even got pictures that are very reminiscent of our journalism activities that are happening over the summit, and the post-it notes. How exactly digital is really only a stage of the entire creative process?
I think it's very much of an iterative process. So basically, if you really want to create visions and think further, I think it's important to really start from scratch, start analog. And I think at a certain stage, then you move into digital, but then you also go back again to analog. I think it's the kind of, combination of both.
How many digital natives do you have in those groups that are working, that are starting with these from scratch processes? Because we're sort of often led to believe that they actually approach things completely differently.
It's quite interesting. In our lab, we have people from different backgrounds and different ages, and there's a core team of 4 members about my age, but there's lots of people from that digital native age, even though I'm not supposed to say that word anymore. But it's interesting. Obviously, they have a very, kind of high affinity to these digital tools, but they really enjoy to put these, smartphones down for a moment and use the post-it again. So they also see that it's quite valid to really start, really simple and think first before you actually start coding.
Okay, so the full-blown loop of creation processes is not dead. This is very good news. If I could ask you to just take a seat over there, Julia, on one of the comfy chairs for a couple of minutes. Thank you very much, and we'll be joining you in a minute. It's time to move on to our second presentation. Thank you to Julia.